Good morning, everyone. How are you? I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share so that we can get to the reason that you're actually here, which honestly, I know that's not for me. That's fine. Um, good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Poe. I am the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library. I'm joined here by my colleagues, Ashley Sklar and Kathy Potter. And we facilitate the All CT Reads program. So All CT Reads is supported by a really great grant that we got from EBSCO, the EBSCO Information Services, that was filtered through the Connecticut Heritage Foundation. So thank you to both of those organizations for helping us run this program. So a few housekeeping things before I turn things over to our speakers for the day. Zoom offers live captions, so feel free to use those as needed. You should see in the toolbar on the bottom of your screen a caption option. You can turn that on or off at will throughout the our session today. And we would appreciate it if it's possible. I'm not sure in Zoom for folks to change their name to like first initial, last name, first name, last initial, just so we can get attendance going. That doesn't always work in Zoom webinar, but if you can do it, we love it. This session is recorded, as you just heard. So the recordings and the resources are going to be available on the All CT Reads webpage. We've got Kathy, who's going to be dropping links to the webpage, to the equipment catalog for you all to be able to request these books that you're going to be hearing about today. The Service Center has discussion sets for each of them. We also ask that for folks who have questions for the author, please drop those into the Q&A box, which you should also be able to see in your toolbar. Feel free to chat amongst each other in the chat, but we want to make sure we don't lose any of those questions, so put them in the Q&A. I am not the most important person here today, so I am going to be quiet and turn things over. I'm first going to introduce Yoli Bergstrom-Lynch, who was one of the committee members for the Adult All CT Reads Committee, and then she's going to do like another row of introductions. It's going to be great. Enjoy yourselves, everyone, and we're going away now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Yuli Bergstrom-Lynch. I'm a research librarian at Connecticut State Community College, Manchester, and as Kim mentioned, a member of the All CT Reads Adult Committee. I am honored to be a part of this wonderful statewide initiative that brings readers together to share in great stories, meaningful dialogue, and community building. So this year, the committee was unanimous in our selection of The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong, and it's an incredibly beautiful and powerful novel. I think that it's sure to spark some thoughtful discussion across communities in Connecticut and beyond the state of Connecticut. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce someone who I'm proud to call both a friend and a colleague, Dr. Quan Tran. Dr. Tran is a senior lecturer and senior program coordinator of ethnicity, race, and migration. It's a program at Yale University where she also teaches and writes about critical refugee and diaspora studies, Vietnamese boat people, Asian American studies, memory, and cultural identity. And her book manuscript, Anchoring Vietnamese Boat People's History and Memory, examines refugee identity, community, and cultural formations in the global Vietnamese diaspora by tracing contemporary efforts in remembering the Vietnamese boat people exodus in Southeast Asia, Western Europe, Australia, North America, and cyberspace. And not to be outdone, Dr. Tran is also a poet and a translator. And in addition to her academic work, Dr. Tran serves as co-chair for the Asian Pacific American Coalition of Connecticut, APAC, where she has been a tireless advocate for community building, education, cultural celebration, and shameless plug, APAC, in collaboration with the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History, is actually co-sponsoring a wonderful and free annual Lunar New Year event right here at CT State Manchester campus on Saturday, February 28th, to celebrate and highlight the rich mosaic of Asian and Pacific Islander traditions in our state. And with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Quan Tran, who will introduce and be in conversation with Ocean Vuong.
Okay, Yoli, thank you so much for that generous introduction. And also CT State Library for inviting me to have this conversation with Ocean today. Ocean, I'm such a huge fan of yours, and I'm delighted to be here with you. So the way that this conversation will work is we'll have about 15, 20 minutes of conversation with each other, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience. So folks, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A button, and then we'll get to them a little bit later. So it is my pleasure and delight to introduce our author, Ocean Vuong, who is a prolific poet, a novelist, and a photographer whose internationally and critically acclaimed works are leaving indelible imprints on the contemporary literary world. His brilliant poetry collections include Night Sky Would Exit Wounds and Time is a Mother. His extraordinary debut novel, On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, is currently being adapted into a film. And I found that out through your Instagram casting post. So exciting. And most recently, his second novel, Emperor of Gladness, was selected as the 2025 Oprah's Book Club's book. And the book has been widely celebrated, topping many reading lists as last year's best book, including The New Yorker, NPR, the BBC, and Time, to name a few. Ocean's literary accomplishments have earned him multiple prestigious awards, including the MacArthur Fellowship and the American Book Award. So Ocean, congratulations to all of your accomplishments thus far. And thank you so much for your light and for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much, G1. I'm so happy and proud to be selected as CT Read. I'm a very proud and I think inevitable product of Connecticut, including the social systems that we have. I'm gonna dive right into it, because I really want to in today's the dire state of our world, our education systems, our art systems, many people ask me like, how did this happen? How did a refugee from Vietnam become a published author, a professor, etc.? And on one hand, we love that story of linear upward mobility in America. That's the American myth of Phoenix rising from the ashes. And the media culture loves to talk of that in terms of in a way like violent terms, right? He blew up. He came out of nowhere, right? We love these sort of like explosions of success. But the fact is that I am a product of Connecticut's social, assistance. It's the social welfare system that Connecticut and Hartford especially has been so invested in for so many decades, being a democratic state, voting to uphold support for immigrants and refugees in low income housing. I'm a product of welfare. I'm a product of food stamps. I'm a product of free school lunches, heat assistance, the Pell Grant. Community colleges is where, at Manchester Community College, is exactly where I found the permission to be a writer in the library. So to me, there are material reasons for why I'm here, and there are material reasons for why I probably would not be here if I was not a refugee in the 90s, in the late 20th and then the 21st century. At any other given time, I don't know if I would have made it, right? So I think there's no explosion. It's actually like coming from a state that has nurtured support for the working poor and for immigrants for so long. I come out of that system long before I ever publish a book, and I'm really proud that the system here has held my work in such high regard. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think, part of the beauty about a society that takes care, right, that makes room for those of us who are vulnerable, is the kind of availability of opportunities, not so much in the sense of this is the land of opportunities, right? But a way for us to think about, our own experiences as having something to contribute to a collective understanding of what it means to be human, right? What it means to be in relation with each other, what it means to be responsible and be held accountable in our ways of being. And I think this is a thread that runs through, all of your work, both in the lyrical form and in the prose form, but also in the photographic forms, right? And we are here celebrating the successes of your brilliance, but I think your point of thinking about behind those successes, right, are like these deeper stories of missed, opportunities of violence, of the kinds that those who survive it, who come out of it, have something significant to contribute. And this next iteration of the work that you are doing and committing to, Emperor of Gladness, is a beautifully hopeful book, despite the kind of demise and desperations and negative lights that many of the characters experience, right? So I would love to hear you say a little bit about sort of the genesis of this particular work, and what is it that in it that you hope for our readers in this contemporary moment to absorb.
Yeah, I wanted to write about Connecticut in ways that I lived and but in ways I didn't see in literature. We growing up in Hartford, I'm in the shadow of Wallace Stevens, Mark Twain, Harry Beecher Stowe, and New England at large, Hawthorne, Dickinson, Melville. Alcott and you could read those books and never knew that Asian Americans have lived in New England since the very beginning of this country. There are also black writers that come out of it. Phyllis Wheatley, one of my heroes. There's nothing more radical than to write as an enslaved woman against your own safety, right? So, I mean, if you ever have I tell my students, you ever have a bad day writing, think of Phyllis Wheatley, right? That to write against all odds and to at such a high caliber, right out of Massachusetts, Jupiter Hammond, Hartford poet, also enslaved. So the history of American letters is, in fact, the history of Black letters, right? I mean that's an American tradition, and so a lot of that happens in New England, and I just didn't see that celebrated. I saw such a lack of that representation even as a professor, right? The canon snuffed out all of these people. And, Wheatley and Hammond came before Whitman, so you can't even argue about like origin or time frame. So I wanted to kind of have this stubborn, when I was growing up, my mother called me Li Lam Gung Dao, right? Which is a stubborn, hard-headed, right? And she always said, "You should be a lawyer. You can argue yourself out of anything." When she was she was trying to discipline me, I would argue. I would ration myself. She said, You should go be a lawyer. You can wiggle your way out of every logic that I'm trying to throw at you." And I think for me, I didn't want to write a story about escape. America loves escape narratives. I'm convinced that there are more Americans who are rescued in American films and books than actual Americans. We want the fantasy of rescue and escape. So I wanted to write a book that acknowledges a lot of Connecticut's, Hartford, and the region's struggles. I didn't want to write propaganda, but also say that, I'm not interested in like getting out because that's such an American, fantasy. Just get out and then we'll value the person who escapes. But I'm more interested in saying, how do we reconsider a life that's worth living so that we don't have to escape in order to be celebrated? Because most of my family still live in Hartford County. They still work in the factories. They still work in the nail salon. I've had lovely job offers from Stanford, Paris. They come in and I know right away before I even look at them, I can never take them because my family is still in Connecticut. I teach here at NYU for one semester, then I go back and I live, within 30 minutes of my family, and I'm proud of that. That's not a burden to me. So I'm interested in reframing Hartford as a place of refugee immigrant life. I worked in the tobacco farms where Bradley Airport now sits. Bradley Airport sits on a tobacco farm. And during World War II, when most of the manpower was exported overseas to fight the Nazis, American labor was in a shortage. And so, because of that, the government allowed Caribbean laborers to come work on the farm. So that's why we have such, a robust Jamaican, Haitian, and Caribbean presence in Hartford. And that community was the first community that I saw. That was the first flag that I ever saw in my life is a Puerto Rican flag hanging out from a car with a pair of boxing gloves. If you know, you know. And I didn't realize that that was such a perfect introduction to America because we were living in Franklin Avenue in this black and brown Caribbean community. And then right away, I came in 1990, and in 1993, 94, all of a sudden a new wave of refugees came. They were coming from the Balkan wars, the conflict, Serbia, Yugoslavia, then the collapse of the Soviet Union, Tajikistan, Albanians. So interestingly enough, like the first white people that I knew were refugees. They had green eye, blonde hair, but they were tr as traumatized as my grandmother was fleeing Vietnam. And they had no English and they were held into our community. Our community embraced them because, again, public housing, public assistance, we were just tending to our own. And I did not realize how rare that was, and I think you would have a lot to say about this, Professor. In I started to realize that like the Vietnamese diaspora and the European diaspora from those refugees is finite. It dominates the American discourse, the Vietnamese diaspora, Apocalypse Now, all the films, a Full Metal Jacket. But the truth is that that population that comes out of Vietnam is finite. It's going to be outnumbered by the rest of history, right? The window of who we are exists only from 1975 to 1990, just about, and that's it. So our stories are going to get more and more rare. And I did not. I was so retroactively lucky to have such a bounty of nexus in Hartford that these waves of immigrants and war became such a foundational part of my social fabric. And I started to see that Connecticut was actually not something that I had to survive, but a special matrix in which I could use fiction to package and reorganize and hold it, because the book is also an archive. The library is also an archive. It's a time capsule. We don't have another wave of Balkan refugees, right? That was it. So, and similar with the wave from Vietnam, and that nexus was so fruitful, and I saw how unique it was, and I didn't see the same replication in other parts of the country, and that's why I stubbornly remain a writer of Connecticut. I have not written about any other place in the world.
That's, I think in your commitment to Connecticut, I think what I got out of the work is also an invitation, right, to recommit to the people who are around us. So when we think about refugee resettlement, oftentimes, refugee populations are resettled in really low-income communities, right? Spaces that the first narrative of assimilation and upward mobility is you get out of it, and as fast as you can, right? And to kind of distance yourself from these stories of poverty, of lack of opportunities. But in your work, I think you double down on this recommitment, right, to the community that has helped you, or the characters in the stories grow, and that this kind of commitment then fully lay out the humanity of those individuals rather than seeing them as statistics, right? Or seeing them as the kind of people who are confined to a particular fate, right? So, can you talk a little bit about the character developments that happen in Emperor of Gladness? Because it's such a complicated story about, disenfranchisement, about places that occupy the margins of society, and but you're doing it, you carefully and so compassionately attend to the individuals who are occupying and building and recreating the space for themselves and for each other. So walk us through the kind of character developments in those types of uh, communities that you are lovingly reclaim and showing us that life continues to happen here.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's such an important question, and I think it's also important for me to not assume that my readers will be outside of the community. So, in all of my works, I do not translate Vietnamese. I don't say he ate pho, a beef noodle soup spiced with anise. I never say that. I assume that everybody knows. I don't assume like an outside audience. So I like to write from the inside. And I love, my favorite theorist, a filmmaker, Trinh Minh Ha, said it best when she said, I do not write about, I write beside. And to me, that's such a wonderful way to frame like writing from your community, about your community, with your community. So you're not like subjecting your community as a specimen that then has to be translated to like the wider world. So, and again, I had lovely models. I mean, Toni Morrison, right, did this. James Baldwin, Teresa Hawk Kung Cha, Maxine Hong Kingston. These writers were so disobedient to that demand that publishing had on them to constantly make themselves palatable to an elsewhere. And I wrote as if there is no elsewhere. What I'm really proud of about my characters in this book is that it's not like they don't know about the Met Gala or Paris as a kind of cultural symbol of exotic opulence, but that they don't care. It's just not a part of their life. Like they don't care about it. Like it's not like they're ignorant of it. It's like it's not a factor in their life. So it's not even like a rejection of like the mainstream or what's central. It's just a turning their back against it because the Met Gala is not relevant to this community, as it was not relevant to anybody I knew growing up. So um, and I think that's really powerful. It's just to say, like, well, whatever the culture salivates over and cherishes is just not applicable here, and it doesn't matter. And so it's just repositioning hierarchies. And so if you have a place, a town that nobody gets out of, what do you do? And I think often in American fiction and Western fiction, that's usually like dead on arrival. If you don't get out of the rough, then you don't have a story. Stories are about movements, about growth. So it's kind of like novelistic suicide to take that off the table. But I was quite stubborn about it because I thought, you know, often you say you need conflict to have a good story. But I think that position comes from absolute privilege. If everything is fine and good in your life, like most of, a lot of canonical fiction is, like I love Jane Austen, but a lot of that is just, wealthy people deciding who to get married. And there's a lot of tension, a lot of vexation. I love that work. But I didn't relate to that because to me, the conflict is already embedded without story. It's embedded in history. So people from the working poor, immigrants, black and brown communities, like it sounds kind of silly to say like, oh, in order to have interest, you need to create conflict. It's like, no, it's life is already conflicted when you don't have enough food, when you don't have enough money to buy heat, when you cannot get out of these social economic stratas that are pushing you down. The proximity and the situation of these social economic frameworks in America is already tense. And I wanted to just allow that tension to work between characters. I did not want to put a plot system on them, like Lord of the Rings, and say, like, now you need to go grab something. You need to go defeat an antagonist. I'm like, there are no antagonists. There are no victims here. There are no villains here. Again, that's like the opposite of what every writing workshop would tell you. But I saw such beautiful, enriching lives growing up. And again, I think growing up in the working poor Connecticut taught me another way to tell stories that I just didn't see in the writing workshops that was fed to me in the larger culture.
And so in, the inward turning of your writing, can you say a little bit about how you're creating like pockets of resistance, right? That exist in these stories, and that resistance has a kind of recognition. So earlier you said, the Puerto Rican flag with the boxing gloves, and you know what you know, right? So I feel like for those of us who kind of come from Connecticut and from those pockets that you are describing in the book, we do know what we know when we're reading your text, right? There's a kind of familiarity that exists in them. And there's also a kind of insider knowledge. And that's what I appreciate so much about it. So there is a question from the audience to ask you what the city or town that serves as the inspiration for East Gladness.
It's most likely East Hartford, but it's a mix. East Hartford. I lived on the border. I lived in Hartford, and then when we got to move on up into Wells Village, which is a lottery system, it's an old village of Vietnam War veterans, designed for Vietnam War veterans in Glastonbury. But the Glastonbury, which is a very more opulent town, really rejected that because it meant that people of color were going to come in, right? And so they did everything they could to deny and shut down that HUD housing Section 8 community. It didn't work, but they tolerated us because we were on the very border. We were basically East Hartford, and it's interesting because we were technically Glastonbury, but our whole social life where we shopped was all in East Hartford, and that was strategic. They did not want us in the heart of it. We only went into the heart of it when we went to school, because that's the bus took us there. So there was a kind of municipal bureaucratic system at work. It's a predominantly white community, mostly conservative. It fluctuates through, but it was evident through my childhood. And that too was a wonderful education, robust education in what America was, how segregated it was, how the racial divides. But then also they needed us to not have such homogenous population in the school system, right? So most of the people of color in the school system came from these HUD housing. They also bussed in folks from Hartford. There was a program from New York that brought in, like it was this kind of PR. And anyways, I have a lot to say about that, but I think part of that is also like reframing these communities as also like I also want to be careful in my work, and I don't want to position what marginalized people are often positioned as in American culture, which is that they're noble and virtuous in their suffering, right? It's like, oh, if poverty breeds good character, then we don't need income inequality. We don't need to solve the housing crisis if it builds character, right? It makes them kind of like holy or what have you. So I don't have my characters are all flawed for that reason. Like they're not virtuous because of their poverty. They're virtuous in moments of relation to each other. And East Hartford, I have such fondness over. Is the place where I grew up, where all my friends were. I saw the opioid epidemic destroy my community, and that also started in Connecticut, in Purdue Pharma in Stanford, Connecticut. And I love that it's also like east of Hartford. Its only identity is like the direction from which it's related to the center. So then that becomes kind of like a wonderful metaphor for marginalized identities, right? Because then you say, well, my question for myself is like, well, Do I really write about marginalized people? And I often reject that term when people say you write about I was like, I don't write about marginalized people because those people are in the center to me. Because when you say marginal, you say, well, marginal to whom? They were always in the center. I don't, it's actually the suburban white folks that are marginal to my experience. Like that's the rarest, even in our human species, the most exotic moment in our human development is the suburb. For most of our species, we survive through geopolitical displacement and communal class systems across multiple stratas. So I think it's about reframing all that too. And East Hartford is such a endearing representation of that. It's kind of like an allegory of that. It's east of the center. And I think choosing to reframe that and call the book, Emperor of Gladness, taking place in East Gladness, is really important to me.
Wow. I mean, the time we have is so short, and you have so much to offer. But maybe as a concluding thought, I would love to hear from you, considering that we are in a very challenging and existential time in the history of our country right now. What are your thoughts about the roles of writers in literature in this moment? And then also, what are the roles of readers as we collectively, right, try to think about whether this is a place in which we stay or we go? And what are our commitments to each other?
That's a lovely question. Thank you. Well, I tell my students this every semester. I say, look, no writer has had the pristine luxury of writing in times of absolute peace. None. Every writer, every hero, from the canonical to the non-canonical, they have always written in times of turmoil somewhere. And that is the assignment. That is the tradition. It's just our turn at it. It should not be so, but it is so. So, the question is, what do we say? How do we use what we have to build a work that comes out of this historic moment? And even if you ignore the politics, it's still a response to it, right? Many people say Robert Frost is apolitical. I said, I don't think so. It depends on how you read it. Robert Frost is a New England writer writing on the stolen land of indigenous peoples. So when you read a poem about him walking in the woods and having an epiphany, to me, you can read it as an elegy for what this country has done to indigenous communities, right? It's still there. There's a there, whether the writer is conscious of it or not. History makes that present. And so with that said, I think the most significant part of this is what's happening in this program here, was that we are dependent on librarians, scholars, and teachers. Like a writer is nothing without a system of delivery to the people, right? You can't just scribble in your desk and then what do you just throw pages out the window? Like we need, publishers, and publishers need libraries. Like this mode of dissemination is what makes the work palpable. Unlike film or painting and art, like a book, you hold a book, like a book is just text until it is read. You can look at a painting and that you see it right away. You can walk past it, look at it with the corner of your eye, and you'll still engage in paintingness. But a book is just an object until it is read. So that process, it's not finished until a librarian, somebody hands it, suggests it, or encourages someone to read it. So literature is highly dependent on a community to curate, infuse value, and support each other to receive it. It is not finished. The reader completes the work. So the writer just makes a blueprint. And so we need everybody involved to get the text and the stories across the systems. And with that said, I think the body is also an archive. The body is also a library. I was raised by women who memorized stories and songs, and the first library that I ever encountered was my grandmother. And so the same thing that my grandmother did for me, librarians now do on a larger scale. And so I think it's more important, to think about the librarians and the people who support these systems, because without them, the writer is just somebody scribbling at a desk.
And with that, I think we understand the assignment is continuing to do what we have been doing in order to, right, extend the safety nets to each other. And thank you so much for your thoughts. And I think I'm going to hand this over now to Kim.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Kwan and Ocean, for this amazing conversation. Thank you, Yoli, who was the person who added your book, Ocean, to the suggested reads for All CT Reads. This has been an amazing conversation. We see the hearts and the claps. Thank you so much. And we just appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I'm sure you've got a lot going on with your teaching. So I'm really excited and welcome to introduce our next committee member, Mary Richardson, who was on the Teen All CT Reads Committee and suggested our next author and book that we're going to be hearing about, K.A. Cobell. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to hear a little bit about you as a person, as a writer, to hear about this amazing book that I read on a like a walk and like listen through Central Park a couple of months back, and we're so excited to hear from you, and then have Mary filter some questions from the Q&A. So our attendees, as KA is talking and as you're thinking, drop some questions in that Q&A so that we can get those answered. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Thank you. It is my honor to introduce K.A. Cobell. She's a fantastic YA author and enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation. We are here today to talk about her 2024 book, Looking for Smoke, which is a YA thriller that will keep you guessing up to the end. Like, our committee was so excited to read it. Like, we were arguing and we're like, this is the top one of all the books we read. I also wanted to say huge congratulations to you because I know you have a short story that's featured in the YA anthology Legendary Fry Bread Drive-In, which just won 2 ALA Youth Media Awards. It is the recipient of the Michael L. Prince Award for Excellence in Young Adult Literature, as well as the American Indian Literature Award for Best Young Adult Book. And with that, I'm just going to let you take it away.
Yeah, hi. Hey, everyone. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here at this launch event speaking to all of you. All you librarians are doing so much to connect readers with the stories that they need and are helping to open worlds to them. That's such important work, especially for the youth. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who read Looking for Smoke. It's so exciting to hear that it was chosen as the teen book selection for all CT reads. It's such a great initiative, and it's really an honor to have my book chosen by the committee, and I'm just so excited to have the chance to get it into more readers' hands. So thank you. As Mary said, I'm K.A. Cobell. I'm an author of young adult books, specifically thrillers, and Looking for Smoke is my debut. It came out about a year and a half ago. And it's been so fun to see the reception of it. Some people are surprised to hear that I was not always a writer. Um, I think it kind of came out of left field as a new hobby in my mid-20s. It it started as I regained a love for reading. In high school, I really only had time to read the books that were assigned to me in classes, and I think I hated every single one of them. Um, but once I finished college, I finally had the free time to read the books that I chose myself, and a lot of them happened to be young adult books. And they made me fall in love with reading again. I really resonate with the prevalent themes in young adult books of potential and figuring out your identity and where you belong and your strengths and what really matters in your life. And I reached a point where I really wanted to try writing my own stories in that setting and in that area. And through a wild and exciting journey, I went from trying out being a writer to being a full-fledged author. And besides that, I'm also a mom of two. I actually wrote the first draft of Looking for Smoke in 1 hour nap time chunks while I was home with my kids. And when I'm not writing or editing, you could usually find me playing pickleball or trying to garden and failing at it or being at one of my kids' sporting events. As Mary said, I'm also a member of the Blackfeet Nation. I spent half of my childhood in Montana and the other half in Washington State. So that's just a little bit about me. My book, Looking for Smoke, is a young adult thriller that follows four teens on the Blackfeet Reservation as they're grappling with the murder of a classmate who they each had a fraught relationship with. And because each of them were the last to see her alive, they all become suspects. If they want to clear their names, they're going to have to learn how to trust each other, even though one of them could be the murderer. We have the main characters are new girl Mara, who just moved to town and is struggling to find her place there. We have grief-stricken Lauren, whose sister has been missing for the last few months. We have class clown Brody, who's fighting against the change that all this trauma is bringing. And lastly, we have tough guy Eli, who has his walls up and he's keeping secrets, but he has his reasons. The novel alternates between each of those four points of view as well as a mystery perspective. So I would say on its surface, Looking for Smoke is a gripping thriller in which these teen suspects are trying to investigate and find the real killer. But at its heart, it is a story of resilience and community, grief and loss, and fighting for your loved ones no matter the cost. And this book is written for teenagers, of course, but I really think it resonates with adults too. The emotions in this book are so relatable. I think that we've all experienced loss or anger at some injustice at some point in our lives. And I think these characters will really touch people of all ages and hopefully help readers feel a little more seen and understood in their own ways too. The idea for Looking for Smoke, it first came to me because I wanted to write Blackfeet characters into a book. One, because I had never seen that growing up. I saw such little native representation in popular media, and I don't think I ever saw a single Blackfeet character. And two, I have so much respect and pride for and in my Blackfeet culture. And I really wanted to be able to share that. My mom is white and my dad is Blackfeet. And so I come from a bicultural household. And I didn't grow up on the reservation like my dad did and like my older siblings did. But no matter where we lived, he always made it a point to pass on all his cultural wisdom and memories and teachings to me and my siblings. And I think that's really special. There were places we lived where many people around me had never even heard of the Blackfeet tribe. And it's a pretty interesting experience to have something in my heart that I hold with such respect and reverence that some people have never even heard of. To have something be such a deep part of me and have so many people not understand what that is, it's just a really unique experience. And that's one of the main reasons why I so badly wanted to write the Blackfeet culture and community into a book. I wanted readers to see the beautiful things that I've seen and to feel what I feel. Growing up, I didn't always have the confidence or the opportunity to truly share our culture. And so writing it into a book felt like a really special way to open up that part of myself. So that is where the seed for Looking for Smoke first started. But because I'm also a thriller writer, I knew that writing these characters into a murder mystery would also bring in the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic, or MMIW for short. And for those of you who don't already know, there is a prevalent problem in the US where Native women are the victims of violent crime far more often than any other group. 4 out of 5 Native women have experienced violence. The murder rate of Native women is 3 times more than that of white women. And in some locations, it's 10 times the national average. And in Montana, where Looking for Smoke is set, natives are 4 times more likely to go missing, comprising over a quarter of these missing person cases, but they're only 6% of the population. So that's a big difference. Also, 95% of these cases of missing and murdered Native people are never covered in national media. They just aren't getting the attention they deserve. So in Native communities, there is a lot of outcry about murder cases going unsolved and girls and women going unfound. So in writing the story of Native teenagers dealing with the murder and disappearance of girls in their community, I knew that this real world issue would absolutely become intertwined with my story. And because of this, I was actually a little afraid to write it, to be honest. I knew it would need a really careful hand to bring in such a sensitive subject matter. And I never wanted to take away from these real MMIW cases or to sensationalize the very real pain that Native communities are experiencing. So I knew it would need to be a very fine line I was walking between crafting this exciting fictional story and honoring this real world issue. But in the end, I knew I had to try. I knew that this was a story that needed to be told and that I could shine more light on the impacts that this crisis is having on real families. Mm. As I was writing it, I found that line of respect and care. It really came down to my characters. I tried to write them from a very real and authentic place so that their emotions would guide the story. You know, the cases in my book are fictional, but the characters' emotions are so real. The feelings that they have of their grief, the loss, this betrayal, this anger they have, those mirror real Native communities. And it's what they're feeling every day. So I think that all readers will be able to relate to these characters because of those emotions. And then in that way, they'll be able to relate to the MMIW crisis. It personalizes an issue that may not touch readers in their everyday lives otherwise. And that's so important because we need more people talking about it. Some people have still never heard of the issue. And for me, sometimes I find myself thinking, I'm just me, I don't always feel like I can do very much, but I can tell stories. So that's what I did. And just like the characters in Looking for Smoke, I wanted our voices to be heard. And I wanted readers to see us here and now in the present tense. And I wanted them to open their eyes to this crisis. But I also wanted to show the strength that we have through it. And I tried really hard to show the support that Native communities give to each other, to show the way we fight for our families, and, just bring them into our world. Um, with Looking for Smoke, the biggest wish I have for readers is that they will walk away from reading Looking for Smoke feeling something. I want them to feel for my characters and what they're going through. And I've considered it a really big honor to be able to write so much of myself and my family and my culture into a story. I put a lot of myself into this, childhood memories and family stories and um, powwow trips, the places we visit on the reservation. I tried to put all of that into this book. Like the memories the characters share and hold are memories that I hold in my heart as well. I even put a lot of my own family names from our family tree into this book as a way to honor them. I think there's something really powerful in knowing where I come from and knowing the ancestors who went through so much so that I could be here thriving. So some of the names you see in the book are actually family names like Arno, Big Crow, First Kill, and even the title of the book, Looking for Smoke, is actually my fifth great grandfather's name, which feels
Awesome.
really special to be able to share. Um, and thinking of names, I also wrote a scene into the book that closely mirrored the way I received my own Blackfeet name. Culturally, names are really powerful in the Blackfeet community, and I'm sure for most other tribes. Today, like everyone else, we all have our legal American names first and last. But we also receive an Indian name, a name in the Blackfeet language. Back in the day, that's all we had. You know, we had one unique name that in some way connected us to the natural world or to some great accomplishment. Um, our Blackfeet names are almost like a possession, like they belong to us. You have to receive it from an elder in the community who's someone who holds cultural knowledge and speaks the language. So when I received mine, it was this really special experience, and it meant a lot to be able to put it into words through a similar scene with one of my characters. Um, I'm going off on a little tangent there, but personal experiences like that, filled with true emotion, create a deeply relatable story, and it creates characters who feel like real people. And I did my best to fill that scene and others with these personal, authentic experiences and emotion so that I was writing every word from a very real place, which hopefully readers can feel. And writing from the heart like that is actually how I found my voice as an author. Um, Looking for Smoke is actually the fifth book I ever wrote. The previous novels were not amazing. I think some of them were almost there, but it wasn't until I started writing Looking for Smoke that I truly felt like this would be the book that would go somewhere. I felt my writing voice finally shaping into something unique and personal. And I think it's because of how much of myself I was putting into these pages. And it taught me how to write from the heart. So it seriously means the world to me that this book is the book that made it. To be able to see so clearly that there is an audience for Native stories and that people do want to see that culture and community, it means everything. It absolutely shows that there's an audience for our books and that we deserve to have our stories up on that stage, that our stories are needed and wanted. I wanted to write Blackfeet characters so that we could be heard and that we would be seen. And to get this platform and to see Looking for Smoke being chosen for initiatives and getting put on reading lists means it's working. I didn't always feel it when I started writing, but through time, I've discovered that I really have something to say, and writing books is the way I can do it. And I want to keep putting these Native stories out there. I hope that the Native youth will be able to see themselves somewhere in Looking for Smoke. And I really hope that each Native kid will be able to relate to something in this book and to feel seen in a way that we didn't always get to see in the past. And like I said before, I hope the non-native youth and all readers really will feel something in this book. I think one of the greatest joys of reading is experiencing something outside of yourself. And this book gives you a really beautiful look into the Blackfeet culture and a really important look into an issue that real communities are dealing with. So, thank you all for helping me get this book into more hands. I really appreciate you and the committee and the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely. I mean, excuse me. And we always talk about with CT reads, it's windows and doors, right? So we're trying to see in, and also hopefully a kid that is part of the Blackfeet Nation can connect to it, like you said. And one of the things I think that is always really important for a teen book, which you do so well, is that emotion. Like each character, like Lauren is so angry over the grief of her missing sister, and any kid can tap into that anger. Excuse me, I'm getting over cold. And then also, the identity issues that Mara is dealing with is being, kind of half in the culture and half out. And like, even though if you're like different from it, everybody has those. There's some universality I think that everybody can tap into. So thank you for doing such a good job with the nuance on that. And I'm just gonna say straight up, Eli First Kill is my favorite character. Like once we like he just like broke my heart into oh my God, you did such a great job. We have a couple questions, if you can bear with us for a second. So one of our questions is, who were your favorite authors when you rediscovered reading?
Well, I had several, but the one that really sparked that desire in my heart to create worlds was actually Divergent by Veronica Roth. I
Nice.
read that, and I don't know what it was about it, but it just hit me, and the romance in it. Four was like my favorite book boyfriend. I don't know why. It sparked something in me that I wanted to do that. I wanted to create characters that just pull on your heart and like a world that you just fall into and can read for hours. It was really inspiring. So I really loved that one. And then I think the book that really made me want to be a young adult thriller author was Sadie by Courtney Summers. That book will always be one of my top favorites. It just like the desperation you feel from the character is like so real. And that it sticks with you. That book is like always stuck in my head. So those are a couple of the most inspiring ones.
That book wrecked me when I read it. And when I was reading Looking for Smoke, I actually was feeling some Sadie vibes
Oh
because
my
I
God.
love how, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody that hasn't read it, but we get alternating perspectives to this book. So if you have reluctant readers, it's a great book to give them because it moves very fast. Like the way you're able to keep the pace, it just blows my mind. Like I couldn't put this down, and I was in a reading slump last year, so this helped kick me out of that. But one of the viewpoints we get before we know who the killer is the killer, and they're listening to a native podcast on the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so we, as a reader, are getting more information, but we don't know who it is. So it also just drives you a little bit bonkers as you're trying to figure it out. 'Cause you're like, is it this person? Is it this person? And this is one of the reasons I love YA thrillers more than like adult thrillers, because like YA authors, y'all are so good at like putting a twist in there that nobody can see. And I'm pretty good at pattern recognition. And I was up to the last, I was like, what? No way. Again, I will not spoil. We have one more question though. Uh, could you say a little bit more about your villain? This person's motives were very mixed, more evil because they were some good mixed in. How did you get this idea? Also, the ending was stunning. I really didn't see that coming. Wow! Exclamation point.
Yeah, well, I will say, I always tell people this, my favorite chapter in the whole book is the last chapter. That one was really fun to write. Yeah, and the motives, I think there were a lot of things I wanted to explore in this book. One of them being these complex motives of certain characters. How, oftentimes we think of villains in books as being, capital V villains. They are bad people and they like being bad people and they just want to be bad people. When realistically, most of the time, when terrible things happen, they are done by normal people who made a mistake that put them on a certain path, or they are stuck in a corner desperately searching for a way out, and they do something terrible because they felt there was no other option. There are always other options, but sometimes, they're just people who can't see a way out and they fall into this terrible place. So I wanted to explore like how do you get there and why? And I also really wanted to explore um like family dynamics and what would you do for your family? Like we are so affected by our relationships for good and for bad, you know? We we would do so much to protect our families, but I also wanted to explore like the line, like where is your line? Everyone's line is different. And I think that's all I can really say without giving too much away. But those are things that were very interesting for me to write through and put into the story.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think our time is at an end. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. And I hope everybody in the state, like who's a big YA reader, like picks up this book because they will definitely learn a lot of stuff. And it is just so good, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciated being here.
Yes, thank you. It is. Mary's not over exaggerating. I read that book and I was so tired because it was like the dead of night, but I just like couldn't and I did the audiobook, so I was just laying there staring up at my ceiling trying to figure out what was going to happen. The end just it's a journey. And I also felt the Sadie vibes, especially with the integration of like the podcast into the story. And that's another book that just sort of stays in the back of my mind. So
Mhm.
thank you so much, KA, for taking the time. And I'm sure there was a lot of emotional labor that went into writing a book like this with experiences that are so close to your own. So we thank you so much for the work that went into the creation of the book and your time here with us today. And thank you, Mary, for being our facilitator for this section. And I hope you both have a really great rest of your day and hopefully not a freezing weekend, but we'll
Yeah.
see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm really, really excited and happy to introduce our final committee member. I did the kids committee, surprise. Nicole Hawkins is going to be facilitating questions for our final author, Alicia D. Williams, who we are so excited is able to join us here for the end of our session and talk a little bit about yourself and a little bit about mid-air. And for anyone who's watching, especially if there's any classrooms, please feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A for Nicole to filter to Alicia. And we're so happy to have you both here. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Kim, for this opportunity. This was a really great journey. I so appreciated being able to be a part of this, and Mid-Air was awesome. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alicia D. Williams. Alicia is an award-winning author and performer known for crafting powerful narratives that offer empathy and inspiration. Her acclaimed works include Newbery Honor and Coretta Scott King, John Steptoe Award debut, Genesis Begins Again. Award-winning picture books such as The Talk and Shirley Chisholm Dared, and the National Award long-listed novel, which we are here to discuss, in verse Mid-Air. By infusing her background in drama and storytelling into her writing, Alicia creates impactful stories that resonate with readers of all ages. It certainly resonated with me. I fell in love with it. It sounded like me overhearing my son and his friends. So I think maybe the main character and his age and his experience and being a Black boy and this whole journey between childhood and adulthood is what endeared this book to me. So please talk to us a little bit more about this work.
Sure. Thanks. I don't have to pull up the PowerPoint. Thank you for having me for one. And you just made me feel good. Forgive it. I know it looks like I'm in a hotel room, but I am a nomad now, so I'm in Italy. So forgive the background right now. Thank you. I'm glad you pointed out that it felt like your son, because I was a little bit nervous on writing this story because I'm a mother of a girl.
Mhm.
And as a writer, you want to hone into the voice. And if you do it wrong, you're going to lose your readers.
Mhm.
And I was so nervous about making sure Isaiah sounded like Isaiah and Drew and the other characters sounded like themselves. This story came out of, I hate to say it, but out of pain.
Mm.
We were shut down during the pandemic, and our eyes were locked into the 8-minute video of George Floyd. And I did not watch the video, but a friend said, don't go on to Twitter. Why? I went on Twitter and the Ahmaud Arbery video played immediately. And I
Wow.
couldn't unsee that shockingness. I couldn't unsee it. And I would pace back and forth up and down my hallway just in trauma. And then I read the last words of Elijah McClain. And I could not understand why they did not pause and say, hey, this is not a criminal. Hey, this is a boy. Hey, his last words were so sincere and awkward and help, oh, you're hurting me. I don't eat meat.
Mm.
Just pieces of words that I just couldn't understand how they didn't see the humanness in him. And so that's how the story began. I kind of want to explore who was this boy and how come we don't see boys as boys, Black boys as boys.
Mhm.
How come they're threats? How come they're scary? How come they're monsters? And I knew I was doing a disjustice, making assumptions, and I didn't want to further traumatize the family or anyone close to that incident. So I pulled back the layers and questioned also, why do our boys have to subscribe to masculine toxicity? Why
Mhm.
can't they have emotions? I
Yeah.
was working as a teacher in a private school, predominantly white, and my kids got to have emotions. My boys got to have emotions. They got to be awkward. They got to be silly. But we didn't subscribe that sincere gentleness to brown boys. And so that's how Isaiah came about. And because I was dealing with grief kind of fused this way into the story.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And I agree. My son is also the age. And when we were going through this whole tragedy, I too refused to watch any videos. I refused to let that in because I knew it would have such a endearing place in my heart if I did, that I would be seeing this again and again. And I did not want to fuel myself with fear, but I also had to be mindful of what my son was watching and taking in. So thank you. It seems like we were along the same journey, and there was a powerful moment for me where these things kind of get discussed, when you're in these virtual meetings and you're coming together. And there was a question about, did we want to discuss it? And I just said no. And it garnered a lot of pushback at work. And I just said, the answer was no, because it meant something different to me. So thank you for putting our boys out in this coming of age story in a way that explores softness. Talk a little bit more about Isaiah and developing him.
Yes, I really wanted Isaiah to be a kid that we don't normally see. We don't give brown boys enough leverage to create a different sense of self. We give them a lot of times on the page, They're the same boy. And not to be judgmental, but sometimes we keep them all in a certain group and they act a certain way, dress a certain way, speak a certain way. But I knew that other boys existed, the geeky, nerdy boys, the boys who like to roller skate, and the boys who like to listen to punk rock. And I was really wanting to explore that boy on the page that doesn't often get represented. And I am big on representation.
Yes.
If you know me, I'm big on representation.
Yes.
Even in the names, I'll try to make sure, I have Abdul and Malcolm, I want names to also be important. So with that, I thought, what boy would he look like? And I remember seeing a movie called Dope back in the day.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so those kids who they had a rock band
Yeah.
in that movie, and they didn't care about matching. They wore Hawaiian shirts with the pants. They wore, and it wasn't about the style. They created their own style.
Yes.
And so I wanted Isaiah to be that boy who created his own style. Now, I also wanted him to be knowledgeable. I wanted a boy on the page that came from a good family
Yes.
because we also don't see that as well. But it was so important for me to have his father, this Pulitzer Prize winning photojournalist, because we don't see that. And it was important that his struggle paralleled Isaiah's. His trauma was the same as Isaiah's trauma, as the same as Drew's trauma, but in a different way. So the parallel in that I was speaking to how they all have these traumas, but they have to find space. And what does that space look like? And so with father is like, I need a new job. I need to take time away from my family. I need to be a better dad. And to be a better dad, I need to heal because I'm seeing repetitive images. For Isaiah, I wanted this punk rocker with a beanie on, the skateboard under with his chucks and his still loving as a boy comic books,
Yeah.
right? And still having these, with a sensitive side. Me and my editor argued, how do we make sure we are reflecting the sensitive boy? And plants, caring for the earth, whether it's having a plant that you care for or being in the earth and digging inside of it. And the parallels Drew's struggle as well. So, yeah, thank
Awesome
you.
job. Thank you. I could see that too. It almost was like the difference between loving Jordans and loving Vans. That was a small like that chapter. I was like, yeah, but his whole like feeling like, I mean, everyone loves Jordans, but he preferred Vans. And it is an idea of like it's okay to have your personal preferences and to step into that. So thank you for giving him that voice and even his beanie being symbolic. Can you just talk a little bit more about the beanie and kind of like what that symbolized when he would kind of go internal and kind of lose his voice?
Thanks for pointing out that our boys are not a monolith.
Yes.
They're not. Thank
Very
you. Um, I wanted, I'm glad you said that because she kept marking beanie. Why is this beanie in this manuscript? Check it out. And I was like, no, it has to stay in this story. We all have that thing that brings us comfort. Growing up, I remember seeing kids, even in elementary, even in high school. There was a girl who would suck her finger and she would carry this piece of cloth with her. And we all accepted it, but it was one of those things that stuck with me. Sometimes we need something to ground us. And I was thinking how our nervous systems are always under attack, and we don't have anything to bring us. We may get a weighted blanket at night. We may need layers. But what is it for Isaiah that signals I need to shut myself off from the world? And what does it mean? So it's important that this beanie is given to him by his grandmother, somebody important to him in his life. And that is when she recognized that it's okay. This is your comfort. And when you're ready to come out of that cocoon, you can come out. So that beanie is like a cocoon for him. And when he is not yet ready, to go, to deal with the real world. And it's a timeout. We don't give young people space to make mistakes. We don't give them space to discover who they are or how they feel. We just like the pandemic and what you said, let's talk about it. No, let's give them space. First, they need to process this. And that beanie represents processing time. That beanie represents, I'm gonna close off all the outside noise. And I just need to I need to hide for a while, or I need to think for a while, or I don't need to think. I just need to be. And that's what that represents for me. And it was so important that I find the struggle of putting it on, taking it off, putting it on, taking it off. And it's a victory that I don't need my beanie anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was beautiful when the recognition that his mom knew he needed the beanie. He was waiting for mom to kind of reprimand him in that. And I thought it was a beautiful moment when mom did not say anything about the beanie, because kind of understanding that our sons need this quiet place, this place to process, not to become punitive, and just like allow him. So mom recognized that and leaned into that. So the concept of midair, it kind of suggests this suspension, and it felt like it was a little bit of a suspension between his childhood and high school, and even the air that he was able to take up in traveling down south. Can you talk a little bit more about his journey down south?
I remember writing that scene, him not crying, like, I don't want to go. Like, I got to be a man up. I'm not allowed to cry, and my uncle's going to see me cry. And
Yeah.
oh, Mama, please, right? It's that I'm your baby now. Like,
Yes.
I'm not a baby, but I'm your baby. And it's the idea that mom knew was best is that you need this. You need this. And you remember, I don't know how many of the viewers know, had this experience that if you were acting up, you were sent to the family down south.
Yes.
But this wasn't you're acting up. I'm gonna send you straight down south to get corrected. This was a space of I need you to find healing. So I'm gonna have you return home because sometimes the South does represent that in a way because we came from this era of being in the South, connected to earth back then and connected to family until we start migrating and moving out different places. So the South for me was the metaphor of coming back home where healing is. Because there's always those family members who didn't go and they hold down the land. So mom sent him down south, even though he did not want to go. It took a moment. My idea for this was not just for him to get to know his uncle in a different way and for his uncle to pass on his learnings and his history and his aunt in a different way. But when you are removed from your environment, and especially when you're removed from being mama's baby, you're allowed to expand in a different way. And I wanted him to expand on his own terms. And there's fear in that. And there's fear in meeting new people. Sometimes we don't realize the fear of the unknown, especially kids. I don't know what's behind the closed door, so I'd rather stay here. No, I'm going to put you in an uncomfortable situation with the unknown. And there's so many unknowns from Lefty to that mountain, you're not the, and riding that bike and facing your fears and making new friends and the experiences you have in the summertime that makes you a stronger person, a better person, a more confident person, even if it's through ADD loudmouth Grady, who is just
I
unafraid.
loved him. Love Grady.
Or Bianca, who has to face her own set of challenges having vitiligo, right?
Yes.
Seeing a whole cast of other people versus with the grief that he has on his shoulder and his friend who he just messed this up and not knowing how to balance either one, how to handle this pain here and how to make up for my lack of understanding that my life is in the boat, yours is not. And I made so many assumptions. So how does he handle the world in a different way? So That in itself was just giving him space now to
Mhm.
figure things out and make his own connections to what is happening.
It was powerful. Just the whole idea of taking up space and walk the air over and over again. It was like that concept, him, the bike and the flips and all of this, embracing just coming into your fullness and being okay with that. Even the beautiful way you wrote his little teen, his little crush and interest, her being someone who was different and not your, I want to say, cookie cutter example of what beauty is and what it looks like, and that he was his own person in deciding what he liked, because Drew had that, back at home. He did go for that. I held my breath with the Drew character. I held my breath, wanting to know what was going on with Isaiah when it wasn't really fully revealed. And it was really, really powerful. Thank you. And Grady and all of the characters were so rich. They brought nourishing to him. They brought, we want
Mhm.
your well-being, but also that push and pull between dig and try to pull it out and let him grow and let him discover what he loves. Even his sense of self with his attire, the vintage shirts, and the love that both parents had to kind of show up for him in this way with these gifts, and what that looked like we love you, we see you, and we support you in that. He really, really needed all of those things. So let me see.
Oh, you have been really reading.
Okay, so I'm gonna be honest. I read when we started this whole All CT Reads, and it just was like, oh, I had to put it down, at first, and I don't want to reveal too much, but I went back because I wanted to go back and I wanted to really explore. But when I went back to it, I listened to it as an audiobook, and then it took on such a different, it became so real for me. Like, again, the characters, hearing the voice, I think that is why I felt very connected to it, and to Drew as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about Drew and just the difference between he and Isaiah? I know you went into it a little bit more, but I feel like he had his own things that he had to battle with, because revealing what he was going through kind of makes you look at this idea of sometimes you're in a place of privilege and you don't even realize you're in a place of privilege, and you can take it for granted.
Mhm. You see that so much with the difference. It's a huge difference between Isaiah's lifestyle and Drew's lifestyle. Drew's in an apartment, Isaiah's in a beautiful home. Drew's father is in jail. Isaiah's working. What they're both away. So they built in a life, but you could see the bubble clearly. And I had Drew really unable to process his feelings because he didn't have space. His mom couldn't afford to give him that space. He had his brother at home, of course, with dealing with his sickness, his mom trying to hold down the fort, and his father who is penalized to be in jail for a reason that we know should not have been a reason at all, right? A lack of insurance, and that is one thing that okay, your life could change your life, and I want to make a big difference that this is a good man. This
Mhm.
family is good. So with him processing it, his way of doing it is avoidance. I just won't even talk about it. And that's why it was so important that I found outlets for Drew in a way until it explodes, right?
Mhm.
He can go and sleep in Isaiah's. That was his space.
Mhm.
Even if he didn't talk, Isaiah knew something was up. His space was that. The in the grief, we're going to do these challenges.
Yes.
And I want it because Drew has to man up in a way that Isaiah doesn't have to man up.
Mhm. Mhm.
So Drew has to man up, but but I wanted him to just still want to hold on to the silliness,
Yeah.
the silliness of being a boy because it's there underneath. Our boys want so much attention. They want hugs. I remember a male teacher talking about online saying his students, his boy students, they are emotional, but they have to have this cover. and they really want hugs.
Mhm.
And that's resonated. He wants hugs, he wants love, but he can't because he's stuck in this toxic syndrome, this bubble of I got to be hard and tough. And his background was he was doing, it didn't make the book, but he was doing all of these challenges and recording them, not to impress his girlfriend, his little girlfriend, but to show his dad.
Mhm.
That's why he always played that cult classic because there's a longing. They both had these longings. And Drew's longing was his dad. So he's recording their crazy antics, eating burgers till they barf, for his dad to have a semblance of when he comes home or when they have to drive 6 hours away, maybe he could sneak that phone in and he could just tell his dad, life is normal. It's okay, Dad. We good. Hang in there, Dad. Because those are the things he has to think about.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And thank you. You did that so well. Just putting the father figures there. Because there is that, again, the idea of the single mom, the single Black mom, but having men who were guiding them, having, even though the dad, he was a good dad and he was wrong, accused being, I want to say in prison for something that you, like you said, you wouldn't even think. It's like, what? That whole idea of you took something so important from this young man. Had his dad been available, what would that have looked like for him? And so how his
And where was he
character,
going? He was
yeah.
taking his son to the doctors. So that
Exactly.
proves he was
So
very.
yeah, it was heart-wrenching. It was really heart-wrenching to me. But again, to have Drew be able to take up space and get it out eventually, I think that was a therapeutic moment. So I want to just go back to the beginning. I know we talked about you wanting to make sure you wrote Isaiah right. Did you choose writing it in verse for that reason? Because I think that's what made it flow for me, the way that it was written. I think young readers will gravitate toward it. Did you pick this writing style for that reason,
Are you
or?
trying to be my best friend?
I'm already your best friend in my head because I knew you were in Italy by looking at you on Instagram. So I was kind of quiet, but I'm trying to make this about you. I don't even want to go through the similarities. I'll DM you. How about that?
Funny. I love it. Yes, I did not. I did not set out to write it in verse. I set out and just wrote it in prose. And in fact, I repeat this story not to shame the author, the author who told me this. I repeat the story not to make anyone feel sad for me or oh that happened to you. But I'm going to tell you this story because I want your students to know to not let anyone ever tell them something that they cannot do.
Mm,
Never, because people will say it for whatever reasons. You don't know what that reason is, whether it's fear, whether it's trying to protect you, whether they're jealous, whatever the reason is. But never let someone tell you something that is meant for you to do that you might even just want to try to do, tell you that you can't. So when I was in school, I wanted to work with someone that was a poet, and I sent in my work. And I just said, I know I'm not a poet. I just want to learn some beautiful, beautiful, how to phrase beautiful sentences. I mean, I only have a semester with you. Please help me figure this out. And that's all. I want to glean a little tiny bit, 10% if I can. And I sent my packet in of poetry and as well as my other work. And she sent my work back with the poetry untouched. And she said, I am not a novelist. I am a poet, not a novelist. Therefore, I do not write novels. You are a novelist, not a poet. Therefore, do not write poems. And I cried.
wow.
I cried bucket tears because I was in my 40s at the time. And yeah, this is all I got going for me. I got to pay student loans back. But I'm here to learn. I was just
Right.
like, you can't tell me what to do. And I gave it up. And I was like, she's right. I'm not a poet. I mean, it's abstract. I don't know about the cascading waterfalls. I've never seen that in my life. I've never seen the horizon, mountains, and the bubbling brooks. That it was too abstract abstract for me. But I sat there and thought, this is not working. At the time, because he was dealing with his grief, he was quiet. And I didn't know how to write a quiet character. And so I scratched the computer and I got a spiral notebook and a pencil. And I said, I just, I need to hear you. And the words came out. The first scene I wrote was when they were outside. It was going to be the first scene of the book when they were outside on his mom's car. You know, if you was to be a superhero, what would you be? And it came out with a sort of rhythm cadence. And I thought, okay, Isaiah, talk to me. And it came that way. And I thought, oh wow, thank you. This is unreal. So it was honestly, it was a gift. I did not set out to do it, but I'm a writer that is more intuitive. So I listen to the character and how the character wants to honor the story being told. And I wanted to say with that, with your students, they all are poets. Because if you think about it, we grew up listening to music and writing lyrics back in the day. If you're my age, you wrote the lyrics, and I would silly Denise Williams, silly me to think that I can ever have before my God. Oh, how I love you. You know, I wrote it, and that's poetry. Kendrick Lamar is a poet. He's a rapper, but that's poetry. You know, when we listen to hip hop, that's all poetry. So we are all poets. And yeah, I see our time is coming to it. Don't see, we're having a good time. I don't even know why you popped up in that little
Put
square up
me in the
there.
group chat. Put me in the group chat. Listen, I was over here talking to myself too. Like, yes, Denise, I had the cassette tape and you'd play and you'd pause and write the lyrics and then rewind and make sure you got them right. Listen, put me in the group chat. And this has been like absolutely amazing. The vibe, if you want to kick me out of the group chat, that's fine, because the vibe that you two have is unprecedented. And thank you so much, Nicole, because Alicia, Nicole's the one who put that midair up for consideration. So I mean, she
That's why she
is
is my
single
best
hand.
friend.
I
I told you
know,
it
I
was.
know.
I
Come
told
on over to
you it was.
Umbria. Come on over to Italy. Come
I
on.
know.
I mean, yes, that is Nicole. So, I mean, thank you to Nicole for putting
Thank
that
you.
book up for
Thank you.
consideration, and thank you to Alicia.
Beautifully
We have
done.
discussion sets of the title at the Service Center to be borrowed. We've got an individual copy which is checked out to me right now, but I'll return it so someone else can have it.
So, one thing,
Yeah.
really challenge your students with the gender norms. Can girls do whatever everything that boys can do? They're going to say yes, but can boys do everything that girls can do? They can't. So challenge them with gender norms, like Barbie and Ken. I'm just Ken. They have to fight and beach fight. You know, I'm just Ken, and that's all boys are doing is that they have this umbrella of yes, you can be president, but you cannot have emotions. So
Mhm.
that's for our next group chat.
That was a
So
great point. Thank you for uplifting that because I forgot to
Yes.
talk about it, but that was a very powerful point when it was presented in the book. It made me think, you know what I mean? Like, wow, so thank you for uplifting that.
Yes, no,
thank
and
you.
absolutely. I do a lot of workshops and presentations on collection development and collection management, and particularly when talking about bringing books into our collection that feature, historically marginalized characters. How are those characters presented in the book? Do we have 20 books with basically the same character, just going through a slightly different circumstance? We need not just boys, Black boys. We need
Yes.
boys doing it all, feeling their feelings, enjoying classical music, skateboarding, roller skating, and playing basketball, right? Listening to rap and listening to, whatever.
Panic at the
We need
Disco.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to make sure that we as librarians and educators have books that show the variety of experiences that a person can have, because no one group of people is a monolith. And it's
Right.
our jobs to make sure that we curate collections so that we can share that knowledge with our patrons who come into our library. So I am so happy that we have Mid-Air as a kids primary selection for the rest of this calendar year. in Connecticut so that we can elevate and amplify that story and that ideal in our state to our boys, to our girls, to any human being, kids, adults, right? Because it's not just kids need to know that. Adults have to amplify that message as well as they're working with children. So thank you so much. Now, if I'm worthy of the group chat, you got to throw me in there. But thank you you
Thank you.
both. Thank you everyone for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you to our supervisor, Don Laval, who I think is in here, was the first one to say hi, for supporting this program that Ashley, Kathy, and I were able to put together for you. Thank you to our state librarian, Deborah Schonder, for all of her support as we dream up these random programs. And she says, yeah, sure. You know, we get the okay through the chain of command. And again, thank you to EBSCO and Connecticut Heritage Foundation for helping to support us bringing in these authors and purchasing these discussion sets. And thank you everybody for coming. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bundle up for the cold. And, you know, borrow those books, read those books, and tell us how they go in your communities. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.